Warning. This Journeys Ahead entry contains graphic violence, strong language, and heavy themes of war, abuse, PTSD, and a narrative that's much darker than the previous stories. If any of these make you uneasy or uncomfortable, please refrain from listening to this entry. For those that are sticking around, this is a prequel to Journeys Ahead Draft 2. If you have not listened to that in full, please do so before listening to this one. Thank you for tuning in, and enjoy this chapter of Iron Maiden. The sound came again, like many times before. The wind, a constant low moan, was the first thing. It snagged on the interior metal. Then came the rest. Not a visual onslaught, but a symphony of destruction that seeped into her metal bones. She couldn't see it. Not yet. She only heard it. Like so many countless times before. 7, 6, 11, 5, 9, and 20 miled to the day. 4, 11, 17, 30, to the day before. She recited within her mind an old poem, one that had resonated deeply within the last few years. Boots, 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 boots. Moving up and down again. There's no discharge in the war. The rumbling from out there was a low, persistent growl, like a colossal beast stirring in its sleep. Heavy artificial cannons, she guessed, or whatever those monsters used in their ceaseless battle. A platform below her feet stuttered and shuddered, conjoined by the sudden activation in a dim blue light, revealing the interior of a Star Slasher's hangar bay, the primary battleship to her race, the Sparks. There now came a shriek of metal on metal, turbulence, giving her no panic, only anger. She had learned to differentiate the sounds over the years, each a morbid annotation in the war she had been fighting in for so long. Don't. Look at what's in front of you. Boots, 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 moving up and down again. Men go mad with watching them, as there's no discharge in the war. The Spark had gruffed a tuft of chilling air, her hands clenched as she stood upon the platform with billowing hatred. At that moment in time, she had been wearing absolutely nothing. Her bronze metal hardened skin was exposed in the light, her panel lines, rivet joints, and all. But that wasn't for long. Suddenly, several hatches opened up within the Star Slasher's metal-plated walls, allowing for the robotic noodle arms with tools and gears to appear like cybernetic butlers. Raising her arms, the Sparkette begrudgingly allowed for these machines to suit her up. She would have preferred doing it herself, but time was now in the essence. They first began with the breastplates and stomach guards. Thick layers of old, artificially enhanced steel were clasped around her chest and waist, clicking together with a sharp clank and loud screws being tightened. Overlaying the gray exterior went another plate that stretched down to the waist cut, a light, dirty blue metal spark crest that compressed down with steam, leaving its under half upon compression. Upon both arms, 2 gauntlets were attached, the same color of blue, spiked up and tightened by leather straps beneath. With them was a pair of brown leather fingerless gloves that, once connected to the arm-braced gauntlets, they sparked with a yellow surge of power, making the Sparkette flinch from the shock for only a moment. Count the bullets in the bandoliers. If your eyes drop, they will get atop of you. Boots, 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 boots moving up and down again. There's no discharge in the war. Below, a metal thong guard was attached, that was swiftly covered in torn blue pelts that had seen better days. To keep these flaps secured, a brown-red supply belt was fastened tightly over her waist, leaving only the boots for last. Latching around her legs came out 2 steel knee, leg, and foot guards, made from the same materials as the chest base. Finally, came the last 2 items for personal gear. The first was a brown, blood-stained fur cape. It was gently layered over the Spark's shoulders before being fastened down near her ocean blue shoulder spheres. With a clank and ratchet, another arm extended down from the roof above, holding a battle helmet, one that was steel with 2 blue stripes going on the horn sides, and a crested blue arrow going below the visor. Reaching up, this Sparkette took her helmet and sealed it around her head, being greeted to a familiar voice. "Welcome back, Lady Celeste." Try to think of something different. Oh my God, keep me from going lunatic. Boots moving up and down again. There's no discharge in the war. Taking in a slow breath, Celeste watched as her HUD came to light, activating and scanning the environment around her. Without so much as a word, she stared on as a new pair of arms appeared, bringing forth her weapons. To her right, she snagged a flail mace, one that could both be used as a normal melee swing-type weapon, as well as a ball and chain. Its handle was a metallic brown, topped with the spiked ball that glimmered her signature blue colors upon its ends. Clicking a button, the handle shrunk, with the ball extending down with a glowing wired chain. To get a feel, Celeste spun the weapon around, before reverting it back to normal and disengaging it into her arm plate. To the left came a shield, a massive guard that had tons of tech and spark essence built into its backside. It was rounded in shape, blue painted with a steel ring ending its form, while even having a split down the middle for another, more deadly purpose. Reaching over, she slid her free arm into a set of hatches that clamped down and connected into her gauntlet, as though it was designed to be one item. Now, she was fully ready for what was to come, the cycle of war. We can stick out hunger, thirst, and weariness, but not the chronic side of them. Boots, moving up and down again, and there's no discharge in the war.
My lady, we are nearing the drop point. Are you prepared to jump?
The pilot of the Star Slasher asked, their voice booming through loudspeakers built into the walls. Scowling, Celeste approached the backside of the vessel, her boots heavy and presence terrifying. Without saying a word, she pulled down a lever beside her, causing a large cargo hold hatch to open up and reveal a dark, stormy, lightning-thundering abyss of clouds. Tain't so bad by day because o' company, but night brings long strings of 40,000 million. Boots, moving up and down again. There's no discharge in the war. Gripping her shield tightly, Celeste made a hard sprint, her small body almost weightless compared to the vast armor and weapons she carried. With 2 hops, she was out of the Star Slasher and entering a freefall. The clouds immediately doused her medieval-looking form in rivers of water, washing away the dirt and dried fluids that would not last for long. The Sparkette didn't deploy her wings. To glide to safety was a sign of weakness to her enemies. In her eyes, it was a show of fear she did not have. Crossing through the clouds, Celeste at last broke through to look upon the world below. Her home, invaded and in ruin. The place she gazed upon was a large, fortified city, designed in her native Spark architecture, highly advanced, but with attributes that screamed of both medieval and Nordic inspiration. Castles and buildings sat perched on a rocky coastline, smaller structures akin to chapels, large homes, and shrines were also seen, but not in the way Celeste had liked to imagine. The city was in a state of ruin and conflict, with numerous fires visible throughout the damaged structures. Blaster fire was going off against an ancient enemy, one that the Sparks had not faced since the Golden Ages. Alien crafts soared through the sky, both of Spark and enemy. The screams became louder the closer she neared to the ground. A forested exterior, a place to land and make a surprise attack. This fight was being lost greatly. She was needed more than ever. I have marched 6 weeks in Ellen Certify. It is not fire, devils, dark or anything, but boots, 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 moving up and down again. There's no discharge in the war. The Spark had finished the poem in her head, was bringing out her shield. With it, she activated Novaroon tips from its rounded ends, making them spin like a buzzsaw until they formed an impact barrier. With this, she braced and crashed into the soil, looking like a blue comet that just fell from the stars. Journeys Ahead. Iron Maiden. Chapter 1. The Beginning of the End. Written and narrated by T.S. ProArt. Ascending out from the crater she had made, Celeste merely shrugged off the impact and glared on ahead, looking upon the barren path that would lead her to a city in ruin. From around the abundance of pine trees, shrubs, and stones, the Sparkette was able to discern gray-toned, decaying, Gothic-style buildings mixed into the foresty landscape. They had arches, spires, and intricate details of chiseled spark runes and text, showing a vast amount of wear and tear through the ages. Large sections of marble walls and structures laid about, crumbled and broken, revealing the interior stonework of beams and wires. A sense of abandonment permeated the area. The last few years of war and damage had even led to Mother Nature reclaiming some of these once mighty structures. Huffing the fallen beauty away from her mind, Celeste began to sprint forwards, running through the trees and ruins that had once been a place of peace for so many. She moved like a ninja, her heavy armor never miraculously causing a sweat to break. She leapt and climbed, maneuvering around trees and stones, sliding through the mud and embracing the storm. As the night made it closer to the city, the radio comlink from her fellow Sparks beyond the city walls erupted within her helmet speakers. Their voices were panicked, scared, and losing faith.
There's too many of them!
Nora Spark screamed.
They're breaching the walls!
Cried a Sparkette, making Celeste move faster on her feet.
Where's the Iron Maiden?
One finally cried, as Celeste broke through the tree line and came to a wet, muddy, sliding stop. Before her sat the giant wall to the city, designed with sharp spikes, metallic plating, and massive Novarunes as barriers. Before it stood a set of ruined structures, more arches, and pillars of large-scale architecture. Flames and smoke raged on from all angles, the rain failing to put its might to rest. And yet, there, swarming the path before her eyes, was the enemy. Most were armored, humanoid creatures. Their gear was predominantly shades of grays and gold, rendered in ancient text and details Celeste couldn't even begin to understand. Their skin were shades of pale white and flesh red, their faces smoothed over like clay with sharp teeth and beady yellow eyes. The most distinct feature most had were the large weapons they carried, resembling assault rifles and swords, but in a more organic design, appearing to be flesh given form. Then there were the larger forces, 8 to 9 foot monstrous humanoid creatures with dark skin, large bull horns on their head, and a muscular minotaur-like build. They had several eyes, 4 in total, gnashing fangs, large tails with clubs, and all held gigantic, curved, dark-colored shields in one arm and glowing red blade-like weapons in the other. They were all armored too, some even sporting fur capes akin to Celeste. Lastly were the most disgusting of the bunch. These creatures resembled bipedal, arachnid-like forms, robotic exteriors stuffed to the brim with flesh and organs in an uneven, forced, horrific way. Their limbs and body were all rustic grays mixed with metallic greens. They had intricate, segmented joints and sharp mechanical details visible. There were 8 long, slender mechanical legs on each one, all extending upwards and then bending back downwards, concluding with menacing, sharp-looking hands. The creatures had small, pointed heads with glowing light yellow eyes, sitting in the center top of their body, surrounded by the lanky, needle-pointed limbs. Snarling, one of the arachnids turned, then screamed aloud, noticing Celeste beginning to charge up with blue spark essence. It howled, pointing a grotesque hand at the small spark, who only stood at 5 foot 10 inches. But her size was something to never be undermined, for this spark was an entirely different beast of a warrior. On instinct, one of the many foot soldiers ran forwards, its gun starting to blaze out rounds of sharp steel bullets. But Celeste wasn't about the foil. With quick precision, she charged her shield, using its spinning Novaroon pieces to blast forwards and crash into the monster with the force of a semi-truck. Instantly, the creature recoiled, the sounds of its armor shattering and bones snapping erupted out like a sickly symphony of chaos. As it staggered, Celeste whipped out her ball and chain, spun, and clashed the spike weapon across the monster's face. An explosion of red, bone, and flying teeth soared through the air, spilling upon the once undisturbed grass and staining it with the first of what was about to become a bloodbath. The first wave surged forwards, lumbering like zombies and shrieking like banshees. They fired haphazardly, bullets of crackling purple energy tearing through the air. Celeste didn't flinch. Her shield rose once more in a blur, deflecting the blast and taking the brunt force like a tank. She then moved in a brutal practice arc. Stepping into the fray, she raised her free arm back and swung forwards, her right, gauntleted fist ferociously slamming into the closest enemy. Its exterior armored metal shattered, its bones exploding with a sickening crunch. Like a baseball getting struck by a pro player, the corpse was sent flying, now a mangled mess of limbs and oozing fluids. Celeste didn't wait for the rest, for her flail mace was already in motion, being a blue blur of steel and fury. The mace smashed into another of the smaller humanoid fiends, its chest exploding into a spray of gore and fury. Another then fell to a brutal backhand from her shielded arm, its body snapping backwards into a fold with a grotesque crack. These weren't just enemies to Celeste. In her eyes, they were stains to be scrubbed away, pests to be squashed. Monsters. Just monsters. The bigger threats were now upon her, the hulking minotaur-looking brutes bearing crude swords and shields of their own. Their thick hides rippled with muscle as they charged. One of these snarling horned creatures swung their jagged blade. Quickly, Celeste met the blow with her shield, the impact reverberating up her arm like a lightning strike. She grunted, the sound guttural and raw, before she surged forwards. She leapt up, the edge of her shield slamming into the horned brute's jaw. It staggered momentarily, stunned, but it was enough. The chain of her flail whipped around, the spike ball impacting the monster's now wobbling turned body with sickening force. Its spine shattered, its vertebrates and organic shards exploding through the muscle. A guttural roar of agony ripped from its throat, before it finally collapsed, twitching on the blood-soaked grass. Now, the mechanical arachnids descended. Their metallic legs clattered against the ruined terrain, each limb ending in claws that dripped with cohesive acid upon attack. They moved with unsettling speed, circling Celeste like sharks in water. Huffing, she pivoted, her movements fluid, like a storm made from flesh and steel. One of the arachnids lunged, a claw swiping at her covered face. Celeste swiftly ducked, narrowly avoiding the attack. She now seized the opportunity, her energized gauntlets flashing with raw yellow power as she slammed a fist into the spider's metallic head. Sparks and blood erupted as its head caved in under the force of the blow. Celeste's horns then began to glow, a pulsating crimson blue. The energy crackled around her, a visible manifestation of the rage that consumed her. Screaming, she unleashed it. A pulse of raw, destructive energy erupted from her skull, washing over the remaining monsters. Many were vaporized, instantly leaving smoldering corpses in their wake. The mechanical arachnids were now momentarily stunned, their circuits having been overloaded from the sudden intake of spark essence. Celeste now pressed her advantage. Her flail mace was back to being a whirling ball of sapphire light at the monsters that remained. Metal limbs flew, fluid splattered, the battlefield becoming the Sparket's canvas of carnage. Her shield bashed, her gauntlets crushed, her flail tore, and her horns pulsed with violent energy. She was an unstoppable force, a whirlwind of rage given form. The remaining monsters, those that still drew breath, then began to retreat. The ground was slick with their blood, and her own was starting to mix with it. Seeing that her current work was done, she turned her head towards the barrier walls and sprinted towards it. Swinging her flail, she swung and lodged the ball and chain around a sticking out spike. Using this, she began to ascend and swing her way up, using it as a way to both keep pace and heal. With a spin and flip, Celeste launched herself up and landed upon the wall's ledge, gazing into the war-torn city. It was a place she had visited many times, but it was now unrecognizable. Buildings crumbled, her people below fought on, many prevailing, others meeting horrible fates. So much was happening, so much chaos, so much destruction. Then, a voice with an accent came over her helmet's comlink, one that Celeste had grown rather familiar with.
Celeste, I see you have breached the city.
They said, voice nerve-wracked and panicked.
You know the drill by now. Take down the Goliath, its gem shatters, the Razor Claws lose their shield for the battle. If my readings are correct, the Goliath should be...
Suddenly, from within the distance, several buildings were toppled over, caused by a gargantuan, 30-story creature rising from the ground. It was a part of the same army the voice called the Razor Claws. The Goliath was a large, disgusting creature with a dragon-like head and humanoid-akin body. Its skull was pointed, with sharp horns and piercing red eyes. Its skin appeared to be dark grayish-black with vibrant, light yellow patterns going across its limbs. The creature had large clawed hands and feet, with a muscular body to top it off. It both roared and shrieked, annihilating sectors of the city, along with passing star slashers that aimed to take it down.
Oh boy, shall I send in an armored angel to help aid you in this fight?
The voice asked, leaving Celeste to roll her eyes and cut the line. She was plenty fine on her own, she thought, before leaping to a nearby building and sprinting across rooftops to reach the Goliath's raging form. Below, the city roared on as a canvas of flickering fire. The once proud buildings continued to be reduced to skeletal silhouettes against the inferno. The screams of Sparks and Sparkettes, the bestial roars of the Razor Claws, all blended into a symphony of war. But above it, on the smoldering rooftops, Celeste moved like the storm she was. Instantly, a trio of winged Razor Claws appeared, their limbs like sharpened razors, erupting from a skylight of the building in front of her. They screeched, hungry, their claws snapping. Celeste didn't slow, didn't even acknowledge them with a glance. Her feet found the edge of the roof, and she launched herself, a Spark Woman projectile arcing across the chasm. As she landed on the adjacent roof, her shield slammed down, its metal meeting the cracked concrete with a resounding boom. The impact threw two of the Razor Claws off balance. The third one, however, leaped, claws extended. That, however, was a fatal mistake. With a brutal twist of her wrist, Celeste ripped the flail up and around, its spiked ends connecting with the creature's jaw with a sickening crunch of bone and splintering teeth, sending it sprawling and twitching to the inferno below. Looking back up, she eyed the other two monsters and raised her shield out and in front of herself. Instantly, the shield bucked, shifting with an internal whizzing of gears, and transformed. The metal parted down the middle and folded outwards, revealing a brutal shotgun barrel that had the shield halves surrounding it at both sides. Celeste fired without pausing. The blast was deafening, a thundering boom of raw power that tore through the first Razor Claw, its body erupting into a shower of gore and black ooze. The remaining one, its eyes wide with instinctive terror, tried to flee, but Celeste was faster. She was on it within 2 strides, the flail a blur as it crushed its skull, leaving it a mangled heap. She didn't even pause to wipe the smoggy goop from her armor. Her gaze was fixed forwards, drawn by the colossal silhouette that dominated the ruined skyline, the Goliath. It was truly a gargantuan being, a walking mountain of malice. The gem that sat upon its head, that was now her sole objective. Destroy it. Spare the city. She now moved again, becoming a brutal ballet of destruction, leaping across chasms, not with grace but with raw force. Each landing rocked the rooftops, adding to the city's symphony of destruction. More Razor Claws appeared, their numbers seemingly endless. Celeste met them in a cacophony of violence. A thrust of the shield that crushed bone and caved in ribs, a swing of the flail that shattered limbs and sent gouts of blood spraying. As she moved, her chest armor suddenly shifted, internal mechanisms whirring. As it opened, she let loose several miniature rockets, each one charged with explosive power that tore through the horde of creatures, turning them into smoldering chunks of flesh. The air was thick with the smell of burned meat and the stink of Razor Claws, a battlefield aroma that Celeste was all too familiar with. She climbed, leaped, and smashed her way across the ravaged cityscape, a one-woman army. Leaping downwards, she landed upon a group of sparks manning large plasma cannons that were trying to shoot down the Goliath's slumbering form. "Keep shooting!" one of the knights screamed. "Where's the goddamn Iron Maiden?" the other asked, as Celeste marched up behind him. Cyclone?" The knight beside him stuttered, with fear rising within his eyes behind the mask. "What?" Cyclone retorted, before feeling the leathery mitten of Celeste grab his shoulder and pull him aside with force. "Gah! Matira's grace!" he gasped, as he and the other knights watched Celeste suddenly climb into the barrel of the cannon that was aimed directly at the Goliath. My lady? I don't think that's practical," the calmer knight asked, visibly concerned as Celeste suddenly got herself situated. Using her shield, she transformed it back into its shotgun form once more, proceeding to fire on the lever to launch the projectiles. Like a bomb going off in the night, the cannon surged with an emerald green flare that sent Celeste shooting out like a living cannonball. Heading directly for the Goliath, reverting her shield back to normal, Celeste once more activated its rune tips and charged it like a battery. Once more, she became a comet of blazing blue stars. Within moments, she was upon the Titan and smashed right into the side of its reptilian-shaped head. A powerful shriek escaped the monster's jaws as it stumbled forwards, catching itself on a skyscraper. Landing with a hard roll, Celeste too crashed upon the building, coming to a kneeling stop and getting a front row seat to the monster's rise. She had got its attention, just as planned. Now, with the left side of its face burned and charred, the creature roared, slamming its fist on the building's top, its red eyes and gem glowing like a blood moon in the crimson night. Cracking her neck and rolling her shoulders, Celeste deployed her weapons, ready to engage the beast one-on-one.
Are you sure you don't want a mech?"
The voice once again asked, only to be ignored with silence. The Goliath roared, its bellows so loud that it ripped through the city's bones. The Titan's hands, being as thick as train cars, swiped the building's top. Concrete shattered, sending a shower of debris cascading to the streets below. Celeste didn't flinch. It was time. With a guttural grunt, she ignited the fight. She charged her shield with spark essence, propelling herself forth like a battering ram. She slammed into the Goliath's massive forearm, a metallic clang echoing through the ravaged cityscape. The beast recoiled, momentarily stunned by the attack, but the moment was brief. Fire, a blast of rage, erupted from the Goliath's maw, engulfing the rooftop where Celeste had stood. But she was gone, a blur of motion, leaping away as the flames passed. She landed back down with a thud on the beast's other arm. Her mace was now back to being a whirlwind of lethal metal. It danced in the air, each swing carving a jagged path into the Goliath's hide. Flesh tore, and the beast roared in pain. Flicking her shield out into its sawed-off shotgun formation, Celeste didn't hesitate. She unleashed a blast of hot lead into the Goliath's massive shoulder, the impact tearing chunks from the thick muscle. The creature staggered again, its rage reaching a boiling point. The fight was a brutal ballet of power and precision. Celeste was a whirlwind of aggression. She used every tool at her disposal. She channeled her raw spark energy, unleashing a surge that crackled from the horns jutting out of her temple. This released another concussive pulse that rocked the Goliath to its core. It stumbled, but remained standing, the gem at the center of its forehead, pulsing with unholy light, untouched. The moment for escalation arrived. Beneath the plates of the Maiden's chest armor, her hatches opened, and a rack of missiles emerged. She unleashed the onslaught, each rocket tearing through the Goliath's wounded flesh, the explosions ringing like thunder. The monster stumbled now, crumbling forwards with its upper body resting weakly atop the building. It was here that Celeste saw her chance. The Iron Maiden charged, using the shield as a battering ram again. This time, she drove it deep into the Goliath's chest, the shield's bright blue edges shearing against bone. With a savage yank, she pulled it free, and the monstrous creature roared, its eyes wide with pain. Now, the beast lunged, head smashing on the roof. The gem was exposed, throbbing with menacing light, the source of the creature's power and the barrier that kept the Razor Claw's defenses up. Celeste saw this, and her entire being focused. She raised the mace, focusing every ounce of hatred, every bit of her resolve into this act. The spikes began to crackle with her own blue energy as she channeled everything in the one final strike. With a scream that nearly everyone could hear, she brought the mace crashing down. The sound was like a thunderclap, followed by the shattering of glass. The gem, bathed in her energy, exploded. A blinding flash of red and blue light erupted outwards. The Goliath, its power source extinguished, gurgled once, then twice, before slowly collapsing. Its massive frame now toppled, and it fell over its own weight, shattering the pavement as it crashed to the streets below. In unison, the Razor Claw's soldiers and their tech flashed with a stuttering red pulse, indicating that their defenses were down. Immediately, it was like a flock of birds beginning to migrate. The enemy ships turned heel. The tanks and super weapons below began to flee, while the battling warrior knights below got the upper hand. Like many times before, the tide of the battle was won, but the war was far from over. On the roof's edge, the wind whipping through her horns, Celeste's shield restored itself into its dormant form and strapped back down to her arm. She watched as the Goliath corpse lay, an indistinct mass of black and yellow in the wreckage, a monument to its failure, a work of art through her fury. The city was still burning, crumbling. The battle raged on, but soon enough, there would be a moment of peace for everyone. It wouldn't have been shortcoming, but it was well deserved.
Great work, my lady, as always. Would you care for a lift back to HQ? We've got several Star Slashers and Comet Crashers that can pick you up.
The voice again spoke, while Celeste took in all that surrounded her. Blood dripped from her armor, mixing with the downpour that soaked her so much so, that a small pool of water began to form within her helmet, just barely. After a long second of contemplation, the maiden watched as the Razor Claw's army fully fled, the sound of death being replaced by victory cries of the warriors she cared for. With that settled, Celeste, for the first time of that day, finally spoke out one simple reply. Sure. "1:36 a.m. Celeste read upon her Star Slasher's pickup interior walls as the storm continued its endless downpour. The Sparkette stood tall, not sitting while many of the other soldiers did as such. They were all silent, battered and tired, terrified of the Sparkette's presence. Turning with her helmet still secured on and over her face, she simply took one look at her fellow Sparks, making them all gasp with a mix of fear and awe. The maiden groaned, not particularly finding that type of attention as appealing as more sadistic-minded folks would. She hated it. The stares. And the fear. It made her feel like an outlier. But she couldn't blame them. With the reputation she had built, it was the only real response, even if they were on the same side. Turning back forwards, she gazed her sights out a slim window that overlooked an approaching structure, the Sparks' main base of operation. It was a small city settled within a foresty moundscape, HQ as they called it. The city was composed of interconnected, light gray structures, resembling large domes, curved buildings, and elevated roadways. Numerous artificial bodies of water were strategically placed throughout the city's in-between segments, connecting different parts of the structure with moats, lush green areas, and vegetation. These were to give the warriors their food supply, as well as a sense of calmness within the war. The central hub of this location was a large, circular stadium-like structure. The design exhibited a symmetrical layout, with circular pathways and radiating structures extending outwards from the central point. Essentially, it was an even bigger dome. As they began to make landfall, Celeste stood near the back, making sure all her allies would be able to leave first, and that everyone was accounted for. Within the largest dome, a meeting was being held, one between Spark generals, officers, and even the king and queen, King Orion and Queen Rosalind. The HQ's main home interior was an artificially enhanced cybernetic command center briefing room. Numerous monitors and displays sat along the walls, showing various celestial bodies and data streams on the war. These high-ranking Sparks stood around a large round table, their postures attentive and formal. King Orion was the largest, with antler-shaped horns akin to an elk's. He had a pale brown face with an exhausted expression, one brought upon from the ages of battle and leading. His body was covered in a special kind of armor, with gold-colored plates on his arms and legs, as well as a lower torso, being divided by glowing orange panel lines. To add more authority to his silhouette, he presented himself by wearing a dark reddish-brown cloak, akin to the Maiden's. His queen, Rosalind, had light brownish-red tan skin and a crown of light brown branching antlers protruding from the top of her head. Her eyes were almost almond-shaped and dark, with teal-colored highlights. Her mouth was soft and thin, tired and strained. Her face even had stylized markings, white dotted tattoos, giving her a unique decorative pattern for all to see. The dress over her featured a prominent decorative design. It was a reddish-purple fabric with dark navy blue sets of accents resting at her waist and lower chest. The dress also flared out into a long flowing skirt, its colors transitioning from dark shades to lighter shades of reddish-purple to pink. At her side stood one of the high-ranking officers. He was a large, four-legged Spark, resembling a spider or scorpion. He had a humanoid upper body with limbs that were primarily red and black, segmented and armored in sharp steels. His face was a pale, almost off-white color, with dark outline features that sagged into a sad, melancholic expression. This was matched by 2 large horns protruding from his forehead in the slim, sharp angles. On his red crest read his dog tag in spark text, Scrape Torchinson. Beside him was another general, a spark who was much bigger than him, not in height, but definitely in width. He was a squat and stocky figure. His head was a pale, almost gray-green, rounded shape with large, dark, almost empty-looking eyes that featured flickers of yellow life inside. He had 5 horns in total, 2 popping out of each side of his head, and a smaller one on the chin, giving the illusion that he had a goatee. His armor was heavily detailed, with a worn, dirty, and slightly distressed appearance, displaying various shades of brown, beige, and muted greens into a camouflaging pattern. He wore functional-looking boots, leg guards, and wraps around his knees. This attitude of style included several utility pouches, grenades, medical packs, a knife holstered on the left boot, and so many other militaristic items that differentiated itself from the typical knight gear, including a massive turret extending over his left shoulder. In the spark's mouth rested a cigar that glinted upon his dog tag. Gunner was all it said. No last name. Just Gunner. Finally, there was the last official standing by. She had a small tan-colored head with large, expressive lime green eyes and a simple rounded facial structure. She wore armor with various textures and details, featuring dark brown and red pelts with tattered edges. She had a sword resting upon her side, crafted in sharp gold by the Spark's professional blacksmith. Her horns were in the shape of a ram's, both curving at the sides of her head, added with 2 egg-shaped ones atop her forehead. She was short, even a bit chubby as one would say, but she was as much as a fighter as everyone else. Sigrun Orosdottir was her name, the gal in the chair.
We're wasting time debating semantics.
Orion's voice boomed, sharp like steel, cutting through the dome with bustling weariness.
We should at least try and find Taraka first. He's always the most exposed.
Rosalind nodded at her husband's words, her gaze unwavering.
His forces are stretched thin. If we find and interrogate one, a swift, decisive strike could cripple their supply lines and give us a significant tactical advantage.
The king went on, making firm hand gestures to get the point across.
Crippling supply lines? Oh, how imaginative.
Gunner interjected, his tone dripping with sarcasm.
Why don't we just send them a sternly worded letter? Maybe they'll all just go home if you ask nicely, eh?
A low growl rumbled in Orion's chest to his general's words.
This is not a joke, Gunner. Lives are at stake. Our planet is dying.
He boasted as a holographic diagram bloomed from the table, showing their planet, a woodland forested paradise named Niflheim, now fallen, as a giant alien craft, much larger than the planet itself, loomed over in a giant hand-type shape. Its fingers were lashed upon the world, its gigantic appendages digging into the crust like a viper's fangs snaring its prey.
Oh, relax, Your Majesty. Nobody's questioning that. It's just that a frontal assault on Taraka's side is without a doubt the Razor Claw's plan. You know that sleazeball. He's like a cockroach with a university IQ. Fighting him head-on would be like playing checkers against a man who plays chess.
Gunner reasoned as he eyed down the giant hand of an alien craft, more so a living world that was sucking their planet dry.
We should be smarter than that. I know Del Morga's fortified position is annoying, but look how vulnerable he is in the open plains. If we take him instead of Taraka, we cripple their necromancer bullshit.
Scrape now pushed himself into the fray, his voice a low rasp.
If not, how about we just pick the other two? Because any one of them will be a pain in the ass. I just want to get this over with and rebuild our world.
He explained while rubbing his temples wearily.
I don't care if we go for the big guy, the ugly guy, or that fucking spider witch for all I care. Just make a damn decision, any of you.
Sigrun, her voice barely above a whisper, offered a timid suggestion. Perhaps we should focus on Nalshoka? Intelligence has suggested she has been making many traps lately. Her defenses at this moment are the least robust, and we could perhaps gain a foothold in that area before they suspect anything.
Orion scoffed. Nalshoka is a twisted slaughterhouse of a soul, a demon. To try and strike her cunning mind would be a waste of resources and life. We need to show strength. We need to strike fear into the heart of the Razor Claws. Fear that only a strike at Taraka will bring.
The king reasoned, slamming his fist upon the table and causing the hologram to stutter. Orion, I love you, but be realistic. This isn't about showing off anymore. If you don't want the Razor Claws to tear out the hearts of those who depend on us, you need to do what is not obvious. Rosalind's voice had begun sharp, but had mellowed out at the end to something more akin of a gentle warning than a command.
Realistic. I am being realistic. We cannot afford to be tentative right now.
Orion growled, slamming his fist onto the holographic table again, making the image flicker violently.
We have spent 6 years under their thumb. We must break free. That means taking out the strongest general first.
The king went on, drawing some eyes from around the sector. And what if we fail? What if there's a plan already made for the attack? Should we be so predictable? What happens then? Rosalind's voice was almost a snarl.
Then we will have learned from it. No great loss will.
Orion argued back, his hands clenching in the fist, and opinions shifting a darker, more realistic approach in a possible victory strat. No great loss. We could lose multiple lives for your ego, Orion. Rosalind snapped in return, finding her husband to be rather ridiculous in that moment.
You think I'm running on pure ego? I assure you, sweetheart.
Orion spoke, his gaze turning hard.
My only goal is to see them fall to their knees.
Please, Sigrun whimpered, shrinking back as the argument escalated. Can't we just decide? The tension in the air groaned, thick and heavy like the calm before a storm. Just as the argument threatened to erupt into something more, a new sound filled the hangar. It began as a low thud, a heavy, deliberate footfall, and another, each one echoing ominously. The sound was accompanied by the drip, drip, drip of water, each drop cutting through the silence like a hammer's blow. All eyes darted to a massive metal door leading into the dome, now swung open, casting a ray of rain into the building. The argument, the strategies, the anger, all of it faded into an unnerving, deafening silence, for a moment of unity was washed over the group upon seeing her. With a demanding presence, the Iron Maiden marched her way through the crowd, silencing them all by her sheer presence alone.
Fight Darfian's spear. It's her,
the spark whispered, as Celeste marched up a short flight of stairs and stood before the group, whole-eyed her with a sense of nervousness. What's my next objective? She asked, her voice cold and fixated on the battle, even in the presence of safety and security. There's nothing yet, my lady. We're currently trying to figure out whether or not we should strike one of the lords, but nobody seems to agree. Sigrun explained, her voice, the one who had spoken to Celeste during the later half of the battle.
Yep. How's about you take this opportunity to get some shut-eye trigger happy? Seems like it's gonna be a bit before new orders come your way.
Gunnar suggested down to the tiny war machine, his voice growing sleepy on its own. I don't sleep. Celeste replied with a tone so dry, nobody truly knew how to respond. Except for one.
Look, you did good work today, my friend. Please, Return to your quarters and rest. We'll be sure to let you know when the next mission is about to begin.
King Orion at last broke the ice, leaving Celeste to huff and turn, leaving the tense room in a heavy, wet stride. The air in the building was cold, a chill that seemed to seep into Celeste's very bones. The Sparkette was now alone and marching down a hall that had a flickering long beam of light. Each step echoed unnervingly in the vast empty space, marking her solitary journey through the metallic expanse. This corridor, like so many she had walked before, was a stark reminder of the world she occupied, a world of cold, devoid of warmth or personal touch. Stopping before a door that slid open upon arrival, Celeste at last removed her helmet, releasing out an empty sigh. Her room was no different than how the halls were. It was a hollow shell of space. It contained only the bare necessities: a bed, storage boxes, food supplies, a punching bag, a stuffed teddy bear, and a small window. Celeste slowly entered, her movements heavy, more mechanical than usual. It wasn't a conscious act, but the accumulated fatigue of countless battles and long, weary marches had begun to define her very soul. Although she was truthful in saying she didn't sleep, several days without it could only last her so long. Perhaps Gunnar was right. She moved towards the bed, each step a labored effort. The weight of her armor, usually a source of strength and security, now felt like an unbearable burden. First, she dropped her helmet, and then the shield, both clattered to the floor with the sound of hefty fallen metal, reverberating like the sounds of heavy bullet shells exiting their chambers. She now followed this with her flail mace, its spiked head thudding hard against the metal floor with a dull thud. The two instruments of war cast aside like discarded husks, like they hadn't just massacred several monsters. Then came the armor itself. Piece by piece, she removed it, each clunk of metal crashing against metal, a release, a shedding of the warrior's external soul. The intricate plating on her chest piece, the hardened gauntlets and leather straps had seen more battles than Celeste cared to remember. 6 years of this, she thought inside, as all the armor fell away until only the thin fabric of a worn shirt given by the chest plate and the underwear remained. She was practically stripped bare, not just of her protective layers, but of a persona she wore so meticulously, a persona that demanded strength and unwavering resolve. She at last settled on the bed, its surface offering little in the way of comfort. As she lay there, the relentless march of duty finally faltered. Her mind, usually a fortress of strategy and tactical assessment, began to unravel. A flicker, a sudden, unwelcoming intrusion, fragmented images of a younger self, a figure small, haunted, cowering in the shadows. There was no clear details in the flash, just the overwhelming sensation of fear, of being helpless and vulnerable, trapped in a darkness she had desperately tried to leave behind. It was a distant memory, one that was laced with the sting of abuse and hard training, a time that, in a way, forged her mindset in the present. She tried to push it away, these unwanted echoes of a past she had sworn to bury in the fight. The lines of anger, the hard set of her jaw, the grim determination that had become her mask, had begun to soften, to crumble under the weight of exhaustion and raw, exposed vulnerability. Her face, once of stoic hatred, gently morphed into something else, something softer, more fragile. Celeste slowly turned her gaze towards the window, the glass now seeming to offer a glimpse of the world outside through the storm. There, the barren landscape gave way to the beautiful forest, what remained anyways. The trees writhed in the wind, their branches lashing like old western whips. It almost felt like a reflection of the turmoil within her, the never-ending battle between the warrior and the child within. A deep sadness slowly washed over the Sparkette, a profound sense of longing for something she could not name, a peace she perhaps would never find. Although being the most known, the strongest, the best of her army, she in truth was alone, not just in her metal chamber, but in her own mind, where the ghosts of a past still lingered, whispering their haunting stories in the quiet hours of the night. The weight of it all pressed down on her, not with the force of a physical blow, but with the crushing, soul-deep pain of memory and longing. The storm outside mirrored her own. As the wind howled, she could only stare out, lost in the desolate beauty of a world as broken as she felt on the inside. Don't look at what's in front of you. Boots, 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 moving up and down again. Men. I go mad with watching them, as there's no discharge in the war. Celeste whispered out to no one but herself, as she at last drifted off into an uncomfortable sleep.